Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Seafarer Social Podcast. Today, I am joined by a fantastic guest, somebody that you may have already seen on LinkedIn. His name's Cameron Livingstone. Very big name on the sort of maritime corporate side of things. A lot of people said to me that I should have a chat with Cameron. And I think one of the things I'm really looking forward to dig into today is exploring a little bit about Cameron's previous career at sea, but also that transition he made from sea to shore, as he is now a qualified maritime lawyer, previously working for Guard Insurance, and has now moved on to Dubai for a new venture. But before we get into any of that, I guess the first place to start is, hey Cameron, how are you?
Good, thanks, Carl, and thanks very much for having me on. It's good to be with you.
It's absolutely my pleasure. So I think one of the things I want to talk about first is, you've been quite active on LinkedIn for some time now. A lot of people within the LinkedIn community in maritime are aware of you. A lot of your posts get a lot of attention. When did you start posting, your maritime content on LinkedIn, and what sort of gave you the idea to start putting stuff out there?
Yeah, I can answer that because it was for a bit of a reason. When I came ashore from Seafaring, which was 2018. I was undergoing like a big sort of career pivot, a big life transition, and I started my law degree at that time. All I had done really was be a seafarer. I started at sea when I was 16, and I was coming ashore at age 30, and I didn't really know anything else. And I found myself in a world where I knew absolutely nobody. I had no connections. The only people I knew were seafarers, and I was trying to study and work in an office, and everyone that I was surrounded by, sort of, their dad was a lawyer, or their mum owned a law firm or something. They had sort of connections, and I had absolutely nobody. And I just started writing little either factual pieces or historical pieces, or just silly little tidbits about the maritime industry on LinkedIn. That was about 2018, and it sort of, I just continued doing it. It was for the purpose of building like a little bit of credibility, if that is the word, but
Yeah.
just sort of getting my name out there as someone who wants to get involved in the corporate side of the marine sector.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such a powerful tool. And, I want to talk a little bit more about that transition you made from sea to shore. But I think to begin with, it's probably imperative that we start off by really highlighting just how important it is, or how much leverage you can get from developing a personal brand. And LinkedIn is a fantastic platform to do that. It's definitely been pivotal for me, for example.
I would agree with that. And I have had my mind changed about it. At 2018, I had no social media, no Facebook, no Instagram, nothing like that. Not at all. And I almost thought it was a little bit wanky.
Yeah.
But like the imposter syndrome was so bad. Like I had to get over this really serious imposter syndrome to put my name on the internet to any kind of fact. I had to stand up and be challenged and be criticized and that sort of thing that comes with it. But once I still battle with that imposter syndrome when I write, I triple check everything because I know I'm going to get critiqued on it. But the power that's come from just having a credible name in a place where like anyone in the world can see it. I'm not a leading expert on anything, just sort of had the courage to put my thoughts and opinions and stuff into short posts.
Yeah, I think
it was just, and I recommend if it's your thing, as soon as you can overcome that little barrier in your mind that says like don't be visible, if you can overcome that, the opportunities that have come from that have been really significant.
Totally agree. Couldn't agree more. And I'm the exact same. The amount of times I put something out there, it's been up for a couple of minutes and I've gone, oh shit, I'm going to delete it. I don't know if it's going to annoy somebody or somebody's commented on it saying, no, this is inaccurate. You got a bad source. And I'm just like, oh, damn. But you're right. I think it's so powerful. Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, I haven't even been to sea. So for some people, it's really difficult to sort of take me seriously because I'm an advertising marketing guy that's somehow, from saying yes to opportunities, found myself in the maritime industry. And, sometimes I think people look at that and they're like, well, actually, what's this guy know about seafarers? He's never been to sea. But sometimes, actually having a different perspective and a different way of looking at things can create a positive impact on an industry. But yeah, I think LinkedIn's super powerful.
Absolutely. And sometimes an outsider's perspective is the clearest. You know, if you sort of if you come into an experience as an outsider, have not experienced it before, you can immediately spot this. This is sort of a significant problem that no one seems to be paying attention to. I think an outsider's perspective is really valuable in lots of places.
Yeah, totally agree. So I know we just jumped straight to LinkedIn. I think it's pretty important that in order to be able to build up to that transition you made from sea to shore, we should probably start from the beginning. So let's go back. Tell me a little bit about your sort of upbringing, your experience of coming from Australia, and most importantly, what inspired you to ultimately become a seafarer.
All right. Well, I can be sort of as brutally honest as I can on the internet, but yeah, I'm from Australia. I grew up. I'm 36 years old now, but I grew up just outside Brisbane in what was then a pretty shitty town called Ipswich, and I started going to sea when I was 16. I could give you all sorts of reasons, bogus reasons that, you know, it was a calling or something, but it wasn't. It was nothing like that. I didn't know anybody in seafaring, but I'd sort of grown up in a pretty crappy town. I just wanted to leave, to be honest with you, Carl. So yeah, I started working on fishing trawlers, and for about four or 5 years, worked all up and down the east coast of Queensland on prawn trawlers, fish trawlers. We were doing scallops. So if anyone's listening from Australia, this is out off Fraser Island, out of Cairns, out of Bundaberg, in the Torres Straits, sort of inner Great Barrier Reef, trawling all the prawns that you see in supermarkets and seafood shops. When I got to about age 20, I joined the Navy as what was called a seaman officer at that time. It's called a maritime warfare officer now. Sailed, did some really memorable postings, spent a lot of time in Darwin on patrol boats, and also worked in the headquarters Northern Command that ran the operation at that time. Patrol boats were mostly employed picking up asylum seekers, like refugees, rescuing refugees who were arriving in Australia by boat. So yeah, spent some time doing that, really memorable. And yeah, stayed for my contract there. And then when I got out of the Navy, I wanted to do the same sort of thing. I'd been at sea in the civilian industry before I went to the military, and so I went back to the civilian industry, got my second mate's license at the Australian Maritime College, and got hired by Shell. And so I was sailing as a navigation officer, deck officer with Shell, just a third mate down on his luck for a few years. And yeah, I got to about age 30 and I had to make a decision, like, am I going to stay at sea for life? Or I'm still sort of just young enough that I could carve out another career. And I hope that this is something we're going to talk about today with your audience, is about how and when to make that jump or that decision if you're interested in it. So yeah, anyway, about age 30, came ashore, started a law degree. I was working for Allianz while I studied law. So I was underwriting marine insurance contracts, and worked in the corporate governance and legal team there as well. Before I finished and got hired by Guard, the P&I club, moved to Norway, and I was working in the liquid cargo team with Guard, which was a really, really fun team to be in, and had a really good time. So we advise tanker owners on disputes about bulk liquid cargo. So they could be crude oil, they were mostly chemicals or refined products, hydrocarbon products, and chemicals. But yeah, all sorts of disputes about cargo, regulatory stuff. Yeah, Guard has different teams for different kind of, like, where it might be admiralty or casualty law or something. And yeah, it was really fun. I lived in Norway for a couple of years, saw the snow. We don't really have snow in Australia, so that was just amazing. In Australia, water stays in a liquid form by and large, but in Norway it turns into all these other substances, hard sort of solid blocks. I don't understand it, but it was really cool. Like, I really enjoyed being in Norway. But yeah, the right sort of opportunity came along, and just about 3 weeks ago I moved to Dubai and joined the Kuwait Petroleum Corporation, their subsidiary called KPC Trading. So the Kuwait Petroleum Corporation are the state-owned oil major of the nation of Kuwait. They had proprietary rights over about 6% of the world's proven oil reserves. So they're a huge, huge oil major, and they've established a trading office in Dubai. So I've joined as legal counsel to their team here. And yeah, I'm just in my third week of the job now. I really enjoy it. I'm in the office. That's the Burj Khalifa is over there somewhere behind us. And it's been a great ride. I like it here.
That's fantastic.
That was a long speech, mate. I've got to check my watch. Crikey.
No, yeah, but it's good because it gives us a whole journey from start to where you are now. And I think for context, it's really beneficial. But I want to dig a little bit, and I'm definitely interested in talking about this shore based job that you've had for the last couple of years. But I'm really interested in learning more about your 20s. What was it like? I've been to Fraser Island, beautiful place, by the way, fantastic
Yeah,
place.
all right.
Yeah, I've been to Fraser Island. My parent in laws are out in Brisbane, and we go there quite regularly. But Fraser Island's a crazy beautiful place, super expensive, but really nice, beautiful place to hang out. We
Yeah.
did some snorkeling on the Great Barrier Reef, etc. How was that as a young man, sort of hanging out? I imagine with your friends, with your colleagues, on the ocean. How was that lifestyle?
Well, probably not quite as glamorous as what you've just described. I was working on the deck of fishing trawlers, which in Australia, and certainly while I was there, say like 2005, 6, 7 onwards, is a bit of a Wild West kind of industry. It's regulated, yes, but I joined trawlers when I was 16, at which time I thought I was a man, a big, strong, tough man, and it was pretty quickly made clear to me that I was not at all. I was a child, and I was. I was just a kid in a man's world, and so most of the other crew, I was sailing on boats, only 3 crew, 4 crew, something like that. They were in their 40s and 50s, and I was just a kid in a man's world, trying to be a man, trying to emulate that, but I wasn't, and it was hard work, like really hard work. So the trawling stints are a couple of months at a time for prawns, and for whiting, you go out for sort of 4 or 5 days. Trawling for whiting is about 4 or 5 days, but it's round the clock, 24 hours. You might get an hour of sleep here, a couple of hours
Oh
there.
wow!
Yeah, for 4 or 5 days. I'd like to think it grew me up pretty quickly. I still had plenty of growing up to do after that, but it taught me quite quickly that I was not as manly as I thought I was at 16 or 18 or something.
Sure.
A really good job, like a really good job for a young man. It took me away from a lot of influences at that time in my childhood, which could have led down a different path. And some people I knew in childhood did go down that path, but it took me away from that, and really, yeah, look back on that with some gratitude.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine it's the
Carl,
same.
beautiful places, as you say, the Barrier Reef, something like that. Working around
Yeah,
there was hard slog, constant hard work, but very few people get the privilege of being able to work somewhere.
yeah, and having family in Brisbane, they've told me of stories of kids nowadays. Sometimes there's a lack of opportunities, just like anywhere else, and they can go down the wrong path. But industries like the fishing industry, the mining industry, these kind of industries are sort of very tough, but very good at sort of building character, which hopefully you can then take and apply to later in life and excel to, levels like you are now. I think my father-in-law says that the people in Australia that go down that path, I think they're labeled as bogans. Is that what it is?
Yeah,
You're you're,
absolutely.
you're a bogan, right?
Yeah, bogans. We call them derros where I'm from as well, derelicts. Yeah. I got plenty of bogan in me, mate.
Yeah,
You can take the boy out of Ipswich, but you
yeah.
can't take the fish out of the boy.
How was the transition to Shell?
Yeah, really interesting. I had sailed in the Navy, the Australian Navy, and then moving on to gas tankers, so LNG tankers, and for any seafarers listening, we're about 100,000 gross tons, a little bit more, and trading between Australia and Japan. Occasionally, some other ports like South Korea, but mostly on long-term supply contracts to Japan. I thought it was great, and to be totally honest with you, my paycheck went up fourfold overnight.
Yeah,
And suddenly, I'd gone from sleeping in like a 12 berth cabin or something like that on when I was on frigates to all of a sudden had my own cabin, shower, washroom, and it was good, but a very not so much a lack of autonomy, but you had gone from having a watch composition on the bridge of say 4 to 6 people to suddenly I was just sort of driving this massive object myself, and I didn't have a lot of experience in doing that.
oh
And
wow.
yeah, that was pretty daunting. Sole watch. There's no such thing really as a sole watch in the Navy. There's always someone up there with you. And anyway, at that time, I didn't have a lot of experience just making navigational decisions by myself. Done a bit of that in the Navy, but not heaps. So yeah, pretty daunting. Pretty daunting.
Was there any particular cases where you were faced with making a critical decision that perhaps if you made the wrong one could have caused a big issue?
Yes. Yes, there was. I remember being in the Korean Straits, so basically between South Korea and Japan, and we were being overtaken by a bulk carrier, a Chinese bulk carrier, who was on a bit of a converging course with our heading. We were being overtaken like this, but he was sort of like that. And anyway, he had the obligation to keep clear. And over the course of about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, I was watching this situation unfolding, hoping, assuming, maybe just hoping that he would take the action that he needed to. But that little voice in the back of my head was saying, like, he's not going to. You need to act, or you're going to have a collision. Now, collision in the Korean Straits, any collision of an LNG tanker is a big deal.
Yeah.
And I think I'd only been employed a couple of swings, but I left it far too late. I can say this now, 10 years has passed, if anyone's listening who knew me at the time. I left it far too late, and I had to call the master, who came up in an urgent hurry, and it was not a good look for me. I should have called 20 minutes before I did.
Was the master able to steer out of the way?
Yeah, and I won't speak on any infringe on his privacy or anything. But yes, he took action, and he was quite calm about it. But it was one of those things. When that happens for the first time, you learn a huge lesson from it, and you spend a few weeks thinking about the different ways that could have gone.
I bet. At the time, what sort of nationalities were your crew that were typically in rotation?
Mostly Australian. They were Australian flag ships, so mostly Australians, or at least people with Australian working rights or an Australian passport. So with quite a few Indian seafarers who had Australian citizenship or working rights, Sri Lankan, Pakistani, and different from South Asia, a few Kiwis, New Zealanders, but everyone had Australian working rights or citizenship of some sort.
How was the culture on board? Were you guys, was it mandatory that you'd eat together? What was the kind of culture like in terms of camaraderie?
I'll answer first. No, it wasn't mandatory to eat together or anything. A lot of the guys are pretty hard old dudes. And I copped some roastings as a junior tech officer when I was on board from a few of the ratings. It's very heavily unionised, and so the ratings form a very particularly strong union.
Yeah, sure.
And that's always a bit of an element. But by and large, I mean, I've got nothing but good relationships that have come from that period of my life. And yeah, I'm grateful for it. The working environment was quite good. Food was great. The ships were well run, well operated, well resourced, in my opinion. Yeah, I'm sure other people might have different opinions, but that was my experience.
Yeah, sure. One of the things that we talk about sometimes on this podcast with seafarers is how we're moving into sort of connected world now, right? And there is a demand from seafarers to have access to Wi-Fi on board. Was this something that was around at the time when you were sailing, or was this?
Yeah, with Shell. So this is sort of 2014 to 2018. Yes, there was Wi-Fi on board, patchy, as I'm sure it still is for a lot of ships. You'd be on a particular course or something and it would just drop out, and sometimes it'd drop out for a couple of days. But I think that's definitely one thing I can say to companies. If a big reason that I hear from seafarers, the reason that they leave, they stop going to sea entirely, is that feeling of total disconnection.
Yeah.
If there was one thing I could say to the companies, if you improve your connectivity for the crew, you will probably retain a lot more crew.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. In fact, this morning, I was speaking to a manning agency in the Philippines, and I was speaking to the owner, and he was saying to me, one of the things that this industry has never been able to crack is a macro-based survey, because we do surveys all the time. Maybe you get 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 responses, which is good. But this is, there's 2 million seafarers from around the world. But no one's been able to really create a survey where we can collect data to understand exactly what seafarers want. Connectivity is definitely part of that. But I think, if you look at other industries, like the food industry, for example, they spend millions and millions of dollars trying to understand what the demographic is for a certain individual, what it is they want, what they would spend their money on, so people don't waste their time, right? Like McDonald's know exactly who they're after, and Michelin star restaurant knows exactly who it's after because they understand the wants and needs of their customers. And I just think the crewing world have never been able to quite understand exactly what seafarers want. Connectivity is part of it, but we're kind of just guessing.
The whole reason Facebook exists is to gather data on consumer trends.
Yeah.
That's what it does. Yeah, I agree with that. And one of the big challenges is trying to get opinions which can conflict across cultural grounds.
That's tough.
Nationality. Yeah, exactly. If you do a survey of the Australian staff in an office, you probably get fairly consistent responses. If you survey 66 different nationalities, or 150 different nationalities about things that are important to them, you're probably going to get 150 different fields of responses. Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge challenge. Huge challenge. There are some industry groups. I'm fairly well known to be affiliated with the Nautical Institute and proud member of them. We try very hard to get meaningful data from seafarers, and you're right, it's really hard. It is really hard.
It is, because it's so, like you said, it's so multicultural, and I think that really is the sort of pivotal point where it's like we have to make sure that we're culturally sensitive and understand and appreciate what is
working conditions.
Yeah,
the working conditions vary wildly depending on basically what sort of passport you have and the flag of the ship and the nationality of the operator. The working conditions on an Australian ship, I am pretty confident, are radically different to those that are, predominantly Bangladeshi crewed or Chinese flagged or something like that.
Yeah, I totally agree. Couldn't agree more. Taking you through your career as a seafarer through your 20s, when did the sort of appetite start to come where you were like, actually, yes, you said it when you were 30, I don't know if this is forever, I want to do something ashore, but what was it specifically that interested you in law?
I thought that lawyers had this sort of pretty unique ability to create a lot of change in the world, and perhaps this was naive of me so something before I started, but I think it is true. I thought lawyers had the ability, but behind every major decision or behind every major event which has really changed government frameworks or law or the sort of fabric of society, I promise you there's always lawyers behind it. You won't see them, you won't ever hear their names, but there'll be lawyers poring over it, and that can be a good and a bad thing. But they did have this, they worked in this environment with which they were able to really influence significant change, particularly in government structures, which really govern all of society, and the way we interact, the way we live in communities is all governmental in a way. And there's teams of lawyers behind all of that.
Sure. I'm interested to know, I've just thought, this just came to my mind, and I wonder if there's some relevance. When you're a navigation officer or any kind of officer, you're constantly reading manuals or have read many manuals, and you're memorizing and understanding, and you become a good learner. Do you think that played a part into your ability to be able to consume information as a lawyer?
That's a good question. As a seafarer, you don't know it, but you do quite a bit of reading of law. So every time you get out an IMO convention or a reference book or something that is some sort of procedures manual, even the internal procedural manual to your company, you're in essence reading rules. And how you comply with those rules depends on how you interpret them. And the interpretation of those rules is what lawyers do for a living. They write the rules, and if they're not the author of the rules, then they're interpreting the rules. So you actually do quite a bit of that. And that was interesting. I was interested in some fields beyond just maritime law, but yeah, about community structures and government structures and the sources of power, why governments have the power that they do. I'm from Australia, so we don't really trust our government, so maybe that had something to do with it. But yeah, look, I do get contacted a lot by seafarers who are playing with the idea of a shore career transition, and I think you do, Carl, as well. Yeah, I think it's something I hope we can talk about.
Well, for sure, and I mean, I think that sort of takes us quite nicely into that exact area. When I put this out that we were talking, I highlighted that one of the common phrases I hear from seafarers is that, I am just a seafarer who will want me once I finish my career at sea. Did you ever feel while you were at sea there was kind of a stigma around that? Is it an existing thing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if there's anyone watching, feeling that way, let's use this podcast to just get rid of that straight off the bat. Yes, absolutely. I felt twofold. First of all, I felt that I would not have the skills to succeed ashore because all I had ever done was like paint decks and test fire hoses. Secondly, I thought that I would be considered weak or not up to the challenge of seafaring or something like that. And that is just garbage. I'm expressing this very, very strongly for your listeners. Rid that out of your head. The world ashore is much, much larger than the world on board. And you're conditioned to a world on board where your whole world exists between your cabin and the bridge, or your cabin and an engine room, or something like that. The maritime world ashore is, I would have to say, there would be 10, 20, 30 times more opportunities ashore than there are at sea. And the myth that I would dispel that you don't have the skills to, succeed in any environment. What seafarers have done, it doesn't matter what position you occupy on board. If you have been to sea, you have occupied a very niche profession which operates in really tough environments, and it operates in an environment where decisions have great consequences. Most people probably started doing this fairly young, and they were gifted authority that is unheard of by other people at that age. You operated in an environment where human life hangs in the balance and often hangs on the end of your hand if you're holding a rope or something. And that sort of maturity, responsibility, that adaptability, the ability to solve problems, I promise you that is exactly what most corporate employers are looking for. Absolutely. It doesn't matter what you've been doing on board, whether you've been painting decks or standing as a lookout or something, but you have operated in a really tough environment, and you occupy 0.1% of people who've ever operated in that kind of environment. Back yourself. Don't focus on the task that you did. Focus on the challenges that you overcame.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I think that's such an important point. The careers that seafarers have are so unique, and the skills, both mentally and physically, they develop are unteachable ashore. And I think that there are, like you said, there are tons of employers out there that if they saw this, if they just in a conversation, if we were able to teach seafarers just to eloquently explain how this has changed them as an individual and how they can apply that change to this role, I think most employers would be chewing at the feet to get them on board.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So let's dispel that myth. Now, the logistics of how to do it, we can come to that later. But I would say think carefully about how to craft your story. Don't just think about what you did on board and be able to say that in an interview. Think about crafting this as a story. What you did on board is actually really interesting to most people ashore. Like most people, if you tell them you worked on ships at sea in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, they actually want to hear about that. And they kind of respect your experience in doing that. So I'd say to all your listeners, how do you craft your story? It's not about what you did on board. It's what challenges did you face? How did you overcome these? You did this in an environment with very limited resources. You did this in an environment where the decisions you make have serious real world consequences. In an office, if you mess up, maybe the photocopying was done backwards. At a sea, if you mess up, 4 people die. And I really can't stress this enough to your listeners. You have done something very unique and tough. Back yourself.
I totally agree. What about the importance of learning? How much emphasis would you put on the importance of studying and learning?
You're going to have to do some of that to come ashore. Probably. The licenses that you've acquired at sea, if you have licenses, are a very valuable qualification ashore. That they're a testament to what you've done at sea. There is a very good chance that you're going to have to do some study. First of all, being at sea for a lot of people is a surprisingly good environment to get some study done. Don't discount the value of doing a 12-month online course or something while you're at sea. Get a certificate, get a qualification. To come ashore, you will have to want to do it, and there will be challenges. It won't all be roses. I would work backwards. Okay, I would if I was sitting on a ship right now listening to this, I would think, what kind of job do I want in the future? Maybe I want to be, an engineering superintendent. Okay, I have an engineer license. I probably need a bachelor's degree. to do this. So working backwards from where you might want to be in 5 years or 10 years, you can think, okay, I need a bachelor's degree. How long is that going to be? It's going to be 5 years. Let's start looking around what sort of campuses offer this. Can I start doing bits of this online now? How much money am I going to need? How much time am I going to need? Where am I going to need to be located? Can I do any of this at sea? What are my sources of support while I do that? So, okay, you want to be engineering superintendent, get on LinkedIn, type in the job role engineering superintendent, see who comes up. Don't be afraid to just shoot them a message and say, hey, I'm a 20-year younger version of you. I want to come ashore, and what advice can you offer? Lean on support structures for that.
And it's a volume game as well. One message isn't enough.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, I contacted lots of people in my coming ashore, and most were pretty helpful. And the ones that were the ones, I'm still in contact with them. And years and years later, they've become sort of career mentors, and I still keep touch.
So do you feel when you've been in the environment, you touched on it earlier on, you said employers want to hear your stories of when you've been at sea. Do you feel like when you have done these jobs ashore, like guard for insurance, do you feel like they, as an employer, valued the fact that you were a seafarer?
Yes. Yes, I do think that. Guard for a couple of reasons. For the technical knowledge, they insure ships, so they do look for people who've worked on ships, as can bring some technical expertise. What I'll say more broadly, and not just applicable to me, but what employers would really look for, I think, in a candidate is someone who is responsible, mature, a good and diligent decision maker, someone who can be trusted to be reliable and dependable, someone whose decision-making ability doesn't have to be refined in this job. It's already present. And that some of those things, I think, suits seafaring down to a T. A lot of industries, actually, military, aviation, lots of remote work, all these sort of situations, you're in arduous environments, largely alone in a small team with very limited resources, and you have to make decisions. Now, as an employer in a shore industry, I think you'd climb over each other to try and get people with those sort of skills.
I agree. I also think another thing that I found when I've spoke to ship management companies, etc., is perhaps if a seafarer wants to transition to a completely different industry, so be it. But I think as an industry, we kind of have a responsibility to kind of retain our seafarers, even if they're not at sea, keep them in the industry as they can, because they can be such valuable assets for the maritime industry from a different angle. And I think we could do more actually as an industry, instead of looking as seafarers as an investment purely for one purpose. We could see them as an investment, as an asset long term, from different angles.
Volume of sea trade continues to increase, and it will continue to increase as long as the human population is increasing. The volume of sea trade is very unlikely to decrease substantially, barring some major global event. However, I'm happy to share some uncomfortable truths that are, in my opinion, I think the uncomfortable truth is that the number of positions available at sea will peak sometime soon and then start to decline. And I'll give you a bit of the background to this, okay? So between 8000 BC and the mid-1800s, seafaring didn't change very much. Okay, so 9,000 years, really, it existed by wind blowing into sails. Now, the ships got bigger, they got made of different things, they were made of wood and, all sorts of stuff. But it didn't really change a lot in, call it 10,000 years. Until the mid-1850s, you got iron, the mid-18s, iron boats. They started being propelled by coal instead of wind. And this was a serious radical shift. But that took 10,000 years to get there. Since then, seafaring hasn't changed substantially. Sure, we use liquid fuels now rather than coal, but essentially the ships operate largely the same way. More technologically advanced, yes, but they're navigated and operated by engineers and deck officers, and they're kept clean and painted and whatnot. If your job is operating a machine, you should expect technology will make that machine more and more autonomous over time. In 10,000 years of history, we've seen the most significant advances only in the last sort of 1 to 200 years. And I think that we'll see very significant advances again in the near future. If you're a seafarer now, I'm not saying jobs are going to evaporate tomorrow. They're not. A realist in that, AI is not going to take over seafaring. But if your job is operating a machine, you should expect the machine to get better and better and better at handling itself. And I don't want to get on a rant, but what I expect will happen is that high-paying skilled jobs at sea will decline over time as the machine gets better at handling itself. The line between an engineer and a deck officer will start to blur, and I think those two roles are going to merge together, because what deck officers do can be done better and better by a machine. I think engineers will probably win. Engineering, maintenance, the construction and operation of those machines, that's something we need a person to do. But navigation, operation of valves and cargo pumps, and route mapping, planning, routing, I think software and machines are going to get better and better at doing this. So I think deck officers and engineers, the line between them will blur, and engineers will probably win.
That's so
That
interesting.
breaks my heart saying that.
Yeah, because one of the things I've found from speaking to engineers and deck officers is there seems to be like a little bit of a clash, right? They're kind of like, oh, you don't understand me. You're just the pretty guy upstairs. I'm the guy that has the brains and the knowledge down below, making the ship go. You see, this is always something that I've kind of observed. Is it a real thing?
Yeah, to an extent, in a friendly way. It's not a genuine rivalry, but yeah, there's a bit of rivalry. The deck officer stream, the top of the deck officer stream is the master of the ship, the highest level of authority. So an engineer is not, to my knowledge, not able to reach the rank of master, but the chief engineer on board is an extremely authoritative person. And he would be treated with the same respect as the master. But there is that little bit of rivalry, because one gets to be the top dog and the other does not. But in defense of engineers, I think what they do will continue to be needed to be done by a human. But navigation, I don't think it's that long before ships are able to do that entire. Well, let me correct that. We have had the technology to do that for 30, 40 years.
Yeah,
that
sure.
technology was in place in the 90s. It just wasn't really reliable enough. As it gets better and better, I think that the ability to control a fleet of ships from an office block in Hong Kong, to navigate them from a remote location, I think that ability will get more and more.
But when I've spoke to captains, they said to me, when I spoke to captains, they've said to me things like, when you become a captain, the job becomes less about theory and more about people management and how you can essentially get the most out of a group of people on board a vessel. Can a machine emulate that? Can a machine ever? Yeah. So from a productivity perspective, surely it makes sense to still have that character on board to get the most out of the crew.
Yes, and I don't think ships are going to go uncrewed anytime soon. And it's not because we don't have the technology to do it, but it's more that wages of a few people on board is actually a very small cost in compared to the cost of running a ship. And it's about the cheapest insurance policy you can buy. The cost of having a handful of, I'll say this delicately, but crew from a developing nation, the cost of having them on board is extremely small, and that is a very cheap insurance policy. If a bird flies into an antenna and it's knocked over and you can't communicate with the ship, just having someone there who can repair it, very cheap insurance policy. For that reason, I don't think ships are going to be mainstream uncrewed anytime soon.
Yeah.
But the duties that we have on board will shrink, I believe, as machines get better and better at operating themselves. They're not going to maintain themselves. We're still going to need to paint this thing and de-rust it. But as machines get more reliable, as they get more advanced, they tend to need less human intervention. And I'm not just talking about ships. I'm talking about machines from all spectrums since the Industrial Revolution. They're not going backwards. They're going forwards.
So if you were still at sea right now and you had the exact same knowledge that you have now and the precautionary, understanding of what could come in the future, what would you be doing about this now?
I would be thinking about where are the goalposts going to be in 20 years? Well, first of all, what goalposts am I aiming for? Am I aiming for master or chief engineer? And this goes back to shore career transitions. We're very accustomed to the rank structure on board and the career spectrum that you have on board, third mate, second mate, chief mate, master, something like that. There's very little known about career paths ashore, so maybe we can come back to that. If you want your goalpost to be master, think about what are the skills that I'm going to need in 10, 15, 20 years to be really excelling in that job. If you're a cadet or a junior deck officer right now, I can say with confidence, splicing rope, chipping decks, repairing fire hoses, things like that are unlikely to be the key skills that you need in 20 years. What you'll really need is to be a good communicator. You'll need to be good with technological tools. You'll need to be technologically literate. You will need to have an understanding of the management structure that is above the master and how to fit into that. You need to have an understanding of commodities, how and why they're traded. Do you want to get all your experience on an oil tanker? Perhaps oil trade's going to decline. Perhaps you'd be better off in LNG. Perhaps you'd be better off in hydrogen, green ammonia, or something like that. That's what I'd say on board. If you are thinking about coming ashore, first of all, you are never too junior to come ashore. If you've done a cadetship or something like that, you've experienced being at sea, you've developed a lot of skills, you can do that. I was just third mate when I came on board offshore. I would again say, have a think about where your goalposts need to be, not based on where they are now, but where they'll be when you want to come ashore. Think about declining job roles and booming job roles. What commodities are going to be traded? What are the software systems that we were talking about a little while ago? Who's writing these? Who's making these? Is they're really starting to reach their boom time now? We need people developing the machines that I'm talking about that are getting better and better, developing the software packages, developing the trade frameworks that we have, and work backwards. So think about those. Think about where you want to be in that 5 to 10 year time frame, and work backwards. What qualifications am I going to need? What education am I going to need? What steps do I need to take to get there?
I think that's really great advice. I think the way to summarize that is basically don't live on Comfort Island, and make sure that you're constantly, looking forward. That's probably the best way to make sure that you don't stay and get stuck.
If you love being at sea, stay at sea. Do for the love of God, do something that you enjoy with your life. But this is going to sound very philosophical, but you've got one chance on this planet. You've got one lifetime, and that's it. There's no second chances. And spending time doing something that you hate just because it's easier than making a jump to something else, there's no greater crime against yourself, I think. Time is the only non-renewable resource you have. Money can be rebuilt. Houses will come and go. Girls, I'm sure, they'll come and go from your life, but time, you can never get that back. Don't waste it.
Very well.
That sounded very philosophical.
Yeah, but it's so true, though. Seriously, it's so true. I think it's very important that you mention this. You mentioned a word there, a very sensitive subject, and that is money. And I'd like to know. I'm completely aware that both you and I are from countries where we do have some economic benefits, and not everybody within this industry is fortunate enough to be in that position. But one of the things I think is a very important subject with seafarers specifically that doesn't perhaps get enough attention is the ability to manage your money, become financially literate. And, you said earlier on when we were talking about the transition, figure out how much money you need to be able to do this. As a seafarer yourself, where did you gain your sort of financial learnings? How did you learn how to invest, ETF funds, this kind of stuff, property? I don't know your portfolio, but was this something that you was always thinking of in the background and looking for information around?
Yeah, probably from a young age. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying I don't have some grand portfolio. Wearing a suit and walking around Dubai doesn't make you a sort of wealthy, influential member of society. But from a young age, I was sort of this opinion that money is kind of a ticket to a better life. And I know money is a bit of a dirty word, especially in some cultures, and we're a little bit ashamed. No one likes to talk about it. But if we're completely honest, money doesn't buy you happiness, sure, but it just is a ticket to having more resources, is a ticket to a better resourced life. There's just no escaping that. As a seafarer, you occupy a very small portion of the population that basically don't have living expenses. Now, I'm not talking about if you have a family or someone to support back at home, but you actually don't really have living expenses. Do you have to be renting a house? Can you just keep your stuff at your parents' place? And having mindset is probably the most important thing I can say there. having a growth mindset about your finances. You have the time on board to get financially literate. And YouTube now is a brilliant resource. There's a lot of free information about this. Sure, don't trust all financial advice you hear on the internet, but learn about how to maximize the growth of your money. Everybody knows how to save. Like everybody knows, yeah, sure, I should save my money. But here's the truth. The quiet truth is that no one ever got rich by saving their pennies. People got rich by putting their pennies into something that grows. So think about that. Use the opportunity of having no living expenses and probably a pretty good salary in most nations around the world. Also use the fact that you don't have to live in the country where your home port is. A lot of Australian seafarers live in much cheaper jurisdictions. They're at sea 8 months a year. They spend the rest of the time in Indonesia or something. Think about that. The world is a much smaller place than it was 50 years ago. It's much more accessible to get to cheap jurisdictions where you can have a great life for a lot less money.
You can be anywhere in a day.
Yeah. To answer the more specific questions, I don't have a lot of literacy about share markets, bonds, that sort of stuff. I am trying to learn this stuff, but mostly it's self-motivated learning. I have some property in Australia, which has been a very, very safe investment. Okay, all right. Here's what I can say. My life to this point has taught me more about what I don't know than what I do know. And good financial advice is worth paying for. That's what I'll definitely say. Find financial advisors or representatives, whatever they're called in your nation. Find one that you trust that has your best interests at heart. And if you have to pay for it, it's probably money well spent. Know what you don't know, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's very valuable to pay for that kind of information. And the reason why I talk about it with seafaring specifically is because there's been many a times, when I've met seafarers, retired seafarers, that have said some awful stories of how there was once a time where they could have been taking anything between $3,000 to $5,000 a month, sometimes tax free, and they've got nothing to show for it by the time that they retire. And it's purely based on the fact that they did not have the information at the time of how to look after their money, and they spent it. And yes, you're totally right. Again, that's why I highlighted when we spoke about this that you and I both come from, fortunately, countries where we have some level of economic stability. We can take more risks. Yeah. And I've met many seafarers from evolving countries like the Philippines who, one person is responsible for feeding 10 mouths. And you can't even imagine what that sort of pressure is. But equally at the same time, I just think even if there was a little, just something they had in the back of their mind, whether it's local information or whether it's, like you said, stock, shares, whatever. I just think it's imperative that we try to advise seafarers to self-learn themselves. But also, I actually think as an industry, because seafaring is not forever, really, it's a young man's game. The older you get, I understand that, some people can go on to their 40s. But the older you get, the less appealing you are for the shipping companies. That's just a fact. Mm-hmm. And I think that, ultimately, as an industry, I think the seafarers deserve to be given something, which is, hey, do you know, if you open up this savings account with us, we're going to match the amount you put in, or a percentage, or just something that really helps them and tries to protect that life after sea fund.
Yes, yeah, very well said. I don't mind saying I saved for 2 years before I came ashore to do my law degree. I had to save the money because I knew I'd take a really serious pay cut when I did. The biggest expense that most people will have, and it's actually, sorry, I'm going to preface this. I totally agree with what you're saying. I'm saying this as a privileged white guy in a corporate office in Dubai, and I have more financial freedom than someone who is feeding 10 mouths in Bangladesh or something. And I cannot imagine that pressure, and I just have the most respect for people who are in that situation. Moving on to something which might apply to other people. In certain jurisdictions, the largest expense you'll have is tax. So think carefully about how you can minimize that. I would say definitely start to understand what you don't know. And there is a lot that I don't know. Good advice can be worth paying for. You don't need to be an expert in everything. You don't need to be an expert in investing. You need to know who the experts are and how to trust their advice. And finally, I would say this is not, none of the, I need to be quite careful with what I'm saying. It's not legal advice. I need to not stray into that territory. But me personally, I took quite a long-term view as to the money. I was not looking to sink it into Bitcoin and try and make a lot of money next week. It was more like buying houses in places where people would want to live in 50 years' time, and having that very long-term mindset to it. And I'm not particularly wealthy. I'm a middle-class guy, I will say that. But I'm glad that I took certain decisions 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. And again, the topic the reason why I'm talking about this has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that you're in a suit right now, that you're a lawyer, that you're in Dubai. I think that's irrelevant. I just think because you have successfully made that transition from a sea to shore, regardless of what career you sought after, clearly at some point you would have had to have spent some money. And I just think it's important that all seafarers, whether they want to stay at sea forever or whether they're thinking about that transition, they should probably try and do a little bit of self-learning. And also, hopefully, there can be more resources out there in the future from the industry that can help them look after their money and make their money work for them instead of just working for money. One last thing
Yes.
before we wrap up. Oh, sorry, please, you're going to say something.
No, the thought just occurred to me. Very, very important to know the difference between an appreciating asset and a depreciating asset, and know how to identify them. And I'm not saying where to put your money, but remember that depreciating assets like a car, for example, lose money. They cost you money over time. Maybe I would advise anyone to take a long-term view of your money with regard to appreciating assets.
Yeah, very good point. This has just come to me, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts. We spoke earlier on about the technical advancements of technology. Everyone's talking about AI. AI is coming for your job. We talked a little bit about autonomous shipping. But what about your job now? We are now in a position where AI is able to gather information so fast. Does that mean that perhaps lawyers could be at risk at some point? If there is a machine out there that can gather the data and make decisions, quicker than a human, does that mean you could be at risk?
Can say, and I'll be careful not to talk too much about my current role because I've just joined. I'm quite new, but I can say positively, yes, I believe so. Skilled professions like lawyers who are involved in drafting what might take them an hour, Microsoft Copilot or ChatGPT can do in 5 seconds. I read a book years ago. This is like maybe 2019, 2020. It was called Rise of the Robots. It was by a Silicon Valley entrepreneur / author. He cited this study. All the talk at that time was that AI and machine learning was going to take low-skilled jobs, like flipping burgers at a fast food restaurant or something, and machines would be doing it. But he cited this study with radiologists and radiographers who read and interpret x-rays, and that the very, very best colleges of radiologists in the world could diagnose a particular type of cancer with about an 80% accuracy, like looking at it on an x-ray. And MIT had just released this algorithm that was doing it with 99.999% accuracy. Now, these radiologists in the US are paid like $500,000 a year. So it's not just low-skilled jobs that AI is going to revolutionize. It's high-skilled jobs too. Definitely lawyers. Definitely.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really,
So
it's
what I
really
would say,
interesting.
anybody, and not just lawyers, not just architects or engineers, anybody. I'm not at all afraid of these tools. I don't think it's going to just wipe out jobs tomorrow. But what I'm sort of trying to get focused on is understanding how to use it. How
Yeah,
to use it to make myself stand out as someone who actually can operate this technology. That I think will make you stand out. Don't
yeah.
fear technology. Understand it and understand how to use it.
What's
How
more
can
powerful? What's
rather
more
than how.
powerful? Yeah, what's more powerful than a machine is a human and a machine. So, I think that
Perfect. Perfect.
although I'm not saying that
AI
we're
is
going to
not
turn into
coming to
cyborgs or something like that, though. But you know what I mean. Nevertheless, who knows? Actually, they're putting chips in people's brains now. So
I'm not worried about AI coming to take my job. I'm thinking more about how can I use AI to be better at my job. And I think that'll, there's got to be a shift in mentality for
yeah,
a lot of people.
I
Now,
totally
I'm a
agree.
realist. I'm not pie in the sky futurist. I don't think jobs are going to disappear tomorrow because ChatGPT came out last year. I don't think so. But there will be a different class of people in 10 or 20 years from the people who are good with this stuff versus the people that don't understand it. And the gap there will just diverge and diverge. So be in the first group.
Well,
Know about it.
I'm
Use it.
already seeing
Use
it
it to
now. I'm already seeing it now. There are marketing agencies, there are consultants that I know that literally that literally are
what?
taking advantage of the fact that there are people they can sell to at a premium price who have no idea that the information that and they're being given is directly through ChatGPT, and they can sell it at a premium. It's the reality, and I'm not saying it's the right thing to do. I'm not saying it's the wrong thing to do, but you're already seeing that the people that understand how to use it effectively are the ones that are already right now reaping the rewards.
Yes, I agree, and I think that group will continue to excel, and the group, there might be a segment of society left behind by these tools. So make sure you're in the first group. Maybe it doesn't apply to your job. Maybe it won't help you fix a car's alternator right now, but the ways in which we can incorporate it into our life will grow.
I agree.
I think.
Final question, Cameron, and I asked this to all my guests.
Yes.
We have a big issue in the industry, which is there is not enough awareness around seafaring as a whole. Some people don't even know what a seafarer is. How do you think we can make this career more appealing to the next generation, given the fact that there are so many alternative options nowadays? An Indian guy can make $1,000 on his laptop in his room working 4 hours a day. So can a Filipino. This is what seafaring is competing against now. How do you think we can, as an industry, make it more appealing to our next generation?
Okay, we could talk high level stuff or we could talk specifics. The high level stuff is it needs to be a little bit more visible because most people just don't ever see a ship, and they certainly don't see it once it's offshore, and they have no idea what's going on with it. Unfortunately, we probably need some market shocks. Whenever given, block the Suez Canal, all of a sudden, seafarers were on people's minds and they were known about. I'm not saying disasters or anything, but we need events which bring this to life. We need to talk about it. I'd love to see, I'm in sort of maritime communities on LinkedIn, but I'd love to see seafarers themselves posting more about what they do, right? I love it. I love reading it. I would love to see stronger community in the industry organizations that we have. So, for example, you get like the Nautical Institute, Royal Institute of Navigation. There's a lot for engineers and stuff, IMAREST. And I'd encourage everyone to get involved in those initiatives, find a sort of sense of community. And into the specifics, I would definitely say being connected at sea is a huge one. That is a relatively small cost for the ship owner, for a disproportionately large benefit for the seafarer. How to make seafaring more attractive. Obviously, we could talk all day about the specifics of conditions on board and living and working, but adequate time off swing, particularly for the world's poorest seafarers who are doing 10 on, 2 off or something like that is, that's borderline modern slavery, in my opinion. But here's the unfortunate thing, which has just been sitting in the back of my mind the whole time. Seafaring is a multinational profession. It's probably one of the most multinational. You can get seafarers from any jurisdiction. It is, by its very nature, a race to the bottom. It's a race to the cheapest, which by its nature then is a race to the lowest onboard spend you can have, the lowest wages you can have, the lowest costs of compliance, of employment, of repatriation. Seafaring is a race to the bottom. Would I advise it as a career path? That's a complicated answer, I'll be honest. And I'm saying that as someone who spent most of my life doing it. It's a complicated answer. There's highs and lows to that. But it will, I think, will continue to be dominated by lower and lower wages. I am at least concerned about that possibility.
I think it's a valid concern. I'm speaking to someone, like I said to you, a crewing guy, manning agency owner in the Philippines, and he was saying to me, the Filipinos have always been the cheapest. The reality is that's changing, and Vietnam is on the horizon now. Indonesia, another one, because you're right, it is a race to the bottom, sadly. And as soon as they start to develop, Philippines is easy because there's systems in place already there. There's a whole network of maritime schools, but they're not as cheap as they once were. And I think you're right that as soon as Vietnam and Indonesia, they start developing their systems within the countries in terms of maritime schools and whatever else, I think it will move.
Yeah, I agree. I very much agree. I think China just took over the Philippines in recent years as the largest supplier of maritime crew, I believe. And whether seafarers know it or not, you're actually operating in a bit of a politicized environment as well, with different flags, different nations, different trade routes. You're operating in a political environment too, whether you know it or not.
Yeah, I agree. But I do think that the Filipinos still have some advantages. I mean, they speak great English. Maritime is massively part of their culture. They're archipelagos, so they're all from islands. They're surrounded by the sea all the time. This is so deeply integrated into their culture.
They're brilliant seafarers, brilliant people, and lovely people too.
Yeah,
I've never met a Filipino person who wasn't just a lovely.
Yeah, and insane levels of resilience. Insane levels of resilience.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Well, Cameron, look, thank you so much for having this chat. I think it's been a really, really insightful conversation. Look, we always try, and I always try my best to develop a positive spin. And I think that there has been a lot of positive that we've come out of this, but I think it's also important to be a realist as well. And I think viewing things from both sides is super important. I personally think seafaring is a fantastic career, although I haven't had the ability or the luxury to ever go to sea myself. I've been on board ships, but I've never been a seafarer. I think one of the things from a communications perspective is seafaring really is probably the last true adventure on planet Earth. If you think about it, almost everything else is predictable now. Everything's got everything's got a roadmap. You can watch it before it happens. Seafaring isn't like that. It's really like the last adventure that this world can offer. And I think it's not for everybody. It'll never be for everybody. But for the right people, I think it's a fantastic option. Although I know that there are insane amounts of complexities.
Yes, absolutely. And where I said before, would I recommend it, is a complicated answer. The positive sides to that answer is that it's the last frontier. There's very, very few people who will ever be on a small metal box in the middle of the Indian Ocean sailing through the back end of a cyclone or a typhoon in the Central Pacific or something like that. It's the last frontier. That's a really good way to put it, actually. And I can definitely say, going back to your previous question, one of the ways to make it a bit more visible, make it a bit more attractive, is probably exactly what you're doing in talking about this in a public setting, getting podcasts going. Yours is one of, I think, very, very few podcasts or media channels about seafaring. So, yeah, I'm not just trying to give you a plug, but you're doing great work, mate. Keep it up.
Appreciate it, Cameron. Hopefully see you soon.
Look forward to it, mate. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be on, and thanks very much for having me.
Take care.